In today's LEOMO webinar, we welcome biomechanical expert and sports technician of the World Tour team, Team Jumbo Visma, Jon Iriberri. Jon has recently been using LEOMO technology in his bike fitting protocols and used several different cyclists in a study to examine the effect that different crank lengths has on dead spot scores, foot angular range, and power generation. So in today's presentation, he's going to take time to explain his research and share with you what he's found through his study. And after he's done with his presentation, we'll give plenty of time for a Q&A session. Before I turn over the mic to Jon, I just wanted to take some time to orient you through the Zoom call platform, especially for those who may be using it for the first time. On the bottom of your screen, you will find a little participants tab, a Q&A tab, and chat. Chat is really useful if you want to discuss topics with the whole group or maybe to a specific member. But please, if you have specific questions that you want to be either answered by our moderators or by Jon himself at the end of the call, please make sure all of your questions are asked in that specific tab. Myself, Amanda, and Joseph, as well as Jim, will all be helping answering some questions. And after today's call, we will be sending out an email that has lots of goodies in it, but also a recorded version of today's presentation. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to Jon.
Hello, thank you very much, Amanda, for your presentation. Thanks, LEOMO, for giving me the opportunity of explaining some part of my job related, in this case, with biomechanics in cycling and the use of LEOMO inertial movement units. And thanks to the public, everybody that's attending the webinar. I hope that my presentation will be interesting and useful for all of you. And I'm free to answer the questions that you can left in the Q&A space, and I will try to answer. I do my best to try to answer at the end of the webinar. So let's go. Okay. Very shortly about myself, I'm involved in cycling biomechanics research the last 18 years. On the right, you got one of my first papers that we did on the past. If you pay attention, I was very lucky to be in the same paper with one of the sport directors of the track team, actually, and the other is the sport director of the Caja Rural team. So we did a very young and very powerful paper, a lot of illusion. Now it's 18 years more or less that we did it. And one of the reasons of staying here, giving this webinar, is also related with this kind of long time giving webinars, explanation, doing research and everything. I have been 12 years working at my own company, Custom4us. I have been involved in the pro cycling for the last 10 years, basically in the Movistar and Jumbo teams. 5 years of experience using inertial movement units, LEOMO and other brands. And I have been focused on LEOMO for the last 3 years because at the start was a little bit complicated to get the device in Europe. So was able for getting in the States, and I had to make a short trip to the States and try to get the LEOMO. And I have been doing dedicated to the research and use of the device on the last 3 years, as I said. We are going to see two topics in one webinar today. The first one is related with the ankling, the movement of the ankle due to the Perylene, and the relationship with the power put, one of the research. And the second one is the relationship between the dead spot score and the crank length. So let's start with the first one, which is the gold standard of the ankle Perylene. So if we see in internet, there is a lot of information, recommendations, and a lot of kind of guides explaining how to pedal, how to put it on the ankle, how to do this, how to do the other. The main thing related with this is that the evidence-based scientific recommendations are not very known. the most of the recommendation done from the point of view of these diagrams of this kind of people that explain it to the other how to pedal, they don't have a very long and very well studied basis. So it's a little bit complicated to try to explain to the people how to pedal when the most of the recommendation that you can find on the blogosphere, they are wrong, at least they are not very accurate. And also, there is one powerful phenomenon that is one of the best riders of the world probably is not pedaling in the proper way. It's a little bit complicated to try to explain to the people that this rider is not working, is not doing the pedaling technique in the best possible way. But this is complicated to explain to the people, but I will try to demonstrate that not only me, but also the science explains that pedaling on some kind of waves is not very useful from the point of view of the power output. So the point is, or the starting of this everything is related with this video that I am trying to share with you. You see that when you are pedaling, some of the riders, a lot of them, they do the kind of dorsiflexion of the first part of the pedaling. They do the extension of the knee, and they end in doing an extension of the ankle to try to handle the downstroke. They recover slowly the foot. In this case, we are looking to the left one. And the cycle is starting again. They do this dorsiflexion, the first quarter of the pedaling, and then an extension. We can find this very, very, very often in a lot of cyclists on the road, but also on the rollers. So when you are in our studios, we can find this very, very often. And we want to know if this is the better way of pedaling. After starting with nothing, we did a small research about what is said in the literature, in the bibliography, and we find some studios. On this case, you can see one simulation of, so this is not a real studio done by cyclists, just it's a mathematical calcul about the power output. And in this case, they found that 10% of loss of sprint's performance related with the ankle movements, when the ankle was too weak during the pedaling on the sprint. We are going to try to repeat this, and we are going to get those data, but we did it with the cyclists during our protocols with the real situation. The second study that pays me attention to this, they used one brace in the ankle to try to fix it. And when they used the brace in the ankle, they found that the power output was increasing in the result of the cycle. So it's very interesting because I have never been this kind of device. I have never seen it, but seems that in this studio, to make more stable the ankle from the point of view of the flexion and the dorsiflexion of the ankle, was increasing the power output. And the third one, less related with our topic, but maybe related with another thing that is very important too, the movement of the ankle and the relationship with the fatigue. The more the ankle room was bigger, more fatigued was the people and more fatigued was the cyclist, and relationship between both of them. So our hypothesis was, is there any relationship between the ankle range of movement and the power output? We designed one experiment based in analyzing the movement of the ankle in a 30 seconds wing rate test, an all-out test that probably most of you know, and see which is the behavior and which is the room along this test in the ankle. We measured the first seconds from the point of view of the power, and we measure also the 15 seconds of the test. There were 10 cyclists, competitive cyclists with experience in mountain bike. And we measured the ankle range of motion, of the first quarter, and the left and right difference between the first quarter and the second quarter of the test. This is the relation or the development of the test along the time, 30 seconds with the power that is increasing very fast at the start, and then it's going decreasing during the time. So this subject, for example, arrived to 1,300 watts and ended in 400 more or less. They end very low power because they use a lot of power on the starting, and at the end it's a lot of fatigue here. And we measured everything during this time. The definition of the ankle cycling range of motion is on this diagram. You can see the biggest angle and the lowest angle, sorry. And the difference between the one and the other makes the range of motion between one angle and the other angle. This is one that is going to be the AR angle, or the full range angle of motion of the ankle. And the second one is exactly the same, but just measure it on the first quarter, from the crank in 0 degrees to the crank in 90 degrees. So those are going to be the two parameters analyzed on our studio. So those are the first results. We found a good relationship between the amount of power that you can see that is decreasing in the subjects when they are using more degrees from the point of view of the ankle in the first quarter. So it's an interesting relationship to make more power in the acceleration of the first part of the wing gait. The subject that they used more power or developed more power, they used more stiffness on the first quarter. And those that they did less power, they used more range of motion of the ankle in a quite close relationship. The second one conclusion is just the relationship between the mean power of the test of the 30 seconds and the full ankle ROM. So in this long sprint of 30 seconds, to get in more medium power, you use the ankle range of motion less than in the riders or the subjects that they did less mean power during the test. So it looks like the Q1 range of motion is related with the power output in the acceleration, and seems that during the full test, it's very related with the range of motion of the full ankle movement. We saw also an interesting difference between the movement along the time. So in the first Q1, the first part of the test, they were moving as a medium value of 32.3 degrees seconds. And at the ending part, this Q1 factor was 37. So increasing of 5 degrees between the first and the second part of the test. It's interesting because this factor makes a difference, but we didn't show any kind of difference between the full ankle range of motion between the first part and the second part. So we just saw the difference on the first part of the Perylene between the first and the second part of the test. Then when we are looking for the asymmetries in the movement, one leg make a very big difference on the second part compared with the same leg in the first part. So the right, in this case, the right leg was more or less exactly the same from the point of view of the range of movement of the ankle, but the difference between the first part and the second part of the test, it's very, very, very big, and they change for more than 3 degrees of difference. So When we try to measure in the torque output of this Perylene, because we want to know exactly why this is happening, or I would like to explain why this is happening. We are talking about the Q1 factor. I want to show this video of a very skilled rider and the way of Perylene of this rider. The first example was a rider with not a lot of experience, a recreational rider, but this other rider is a professional rider. And the way of Perylene of this rider, as you can see, is making a big dorsiflexion of the first starting part of the Perylene. Then it's recovering this movement, and the ankle is making the normal extension on the recovery. Okay. I just want to show where the difference on this acceleration and also in the change from the point of view of the power expedition between the first part of the Perylene, when the ankle is weak, you can see this on first 90 degrees of the Perylene, this, the torque, the amount of tangential energy that is done on this way is quite weak compared with this other one. So we found a difference between 15, 20 watts of difference on one Perylene or the other, just seeing the comparison on the first quarter. There are another difference on the rest of the Perylene that is not related really with the thing and the topic that we are developing. So when you go the stiff ankle and your ankle is very stable and you don't lose any kind of degrees on this part, what happens is that the tangential force is quite linear till the top. But when you do the dorsiflexion, you lose time and degrees for making strength on the pedals. And what happens is this phenomenon that is not straight movement, it's quite sinusoidal to arrive to the top of the Perylene. So this is the result from the point of view of the tangential, or why to try to do this dorsiflexion makes you lose power because you lose torque on the downstroke. So just to take home as a reminder of every conclusion made on this studio, for a powerful pedal downstroke, ankle should be as stiff as possible in Q1. We have been riders on the studio seeing that they were pedaling around 20 or 25, less than 30 degrees of movement on this first part of the Perylene. When we talk about 30 seconds all-out sprint, the stiffer the ankle ROM is, the higher is going to be the mean power of this sprint. So we have to take care to the Q1, but also we have to take care on the long sprint on 30 seconds to the ROM of the full range of motion of the ankle. The third conclusion is that the fatigue, affects more ankle on the Q1 and the ankle full range. We have seen on the graphic that probably when we are fatigued, our ankle is more weaker and makes more mistakes in the first quarter than in the rest of the range. And the lastest conclusion is that the fatigue increases the ankle asymmetry. If we see riders that can be pedaling weak, probably with the presence of the fatigue, when we do our biomechanical studios, for example, we see the people normally rested, well recovered, and they are ankling. So what can be more or less possible and we can suspect is that during the training and during the sessions that they do when they pedal in, the range of motion is going to get worse because they are going to get more weaker. So this is the fourth conclusion, that fatigue increases the ankle asymmetry between the one and the other. So this is the end of the first part of the presentation. And let's go to the second one. We were wondering about what was the influence between the crank length and the DSS, the dead spot score, LEOMO measurement effect. For those that maybe they are not very close to this parameter, the dead spot score, that is very mentioned, but maybe not a lot of people knows exactly what we are talking about. I make my own two definition. When the foot doesn't make inertial movement and decreases the speed of the crank, normally makes a dead spot score in a bigger or a less magnitude. At the end, from a more physical point of view, we are talking about change the normal sinusoidal acceleration wave that is altered. Okay, so in the video you can see, this is the video that is on the LEOMO website. You can see that when the rider stays in these 2 points, the upper one and the down one, it's appearing somehow this kind of phenomenon here, the amount of stopping. Why is this stopping? Because the ankle must come from the recovery or a dorsiflexion, try to extend and try to flex again to try to recover the Perylene. So it's very complicated to not stop the pedals when you are doing the downstroke on this way. When you change from the dorsiflexion to the extension, it's very easy to break the pedals. But it was not justified, it just was an impression of us. And on this way, we try to find on the bibliography what's said about the crank length and the influence on the Perylene. And from the Professor Bini, the longer the crank arm length is, the higher the torque for the same angular velocity and effective force. So the longer, the better at the end of the day, from the point of view of having more torque, so having more strength tangential to the Perylene. And the second one, cyclists can ride the crank length they prefer without concern of decreasing maximal power. That both are not contradictory. Jim Martin just said that it's possible to get the same power with the shorter and the longer cranks. Our idea was not to try to justify or know this theory. We try it to see if the shorter and the longer crank were getting any kind of interference from the point of view of the continuous power, not just of the maximal power that Jim Martin did in his amazing studios. So the question is, why the longer crank is not the best universal solution? Why don't we use 175, 180 cranks everybody, and the longer the better? Well, probably the motor control of the movement is more complex when the crank is longer. That's what was the starting hypothesis about this studio. So we decided to do one protocol. The cyclists were done 3 watts per kilogram output. At first at the end of 2 minutes in 165 cranks. Then they rest for a minute. They did another 2 minutes of 170 pedaling and 3 watts per kilogram with those cranks. And the last attempt, after 1 minute for changing the cranks, another 2 minutes, 175. That was our protocol. We did it with this device that you can see here. Those are the power cranks. We use them in the fixed way, obviously. We did not use them in independent way. But it was very easy to try to change the length of the crank immediately, to try to have no time for making any kind of training to the riders or make short teaching or whatever. We did it everything, follow it from the point of view of the protocol. Our riders were around 177 of 8 centimeters, 73.7 kilograms. Body mass index of 23.46, so they were more or less fitted, not especially in bad shape. The length was 80.9 centimeters, and the amount of annual kilometers, median amount of kilometers per year was 7,700 more or less. Those are the description of our riders. I would like to answer one question that is normally should be done at the end of this webinar. Did we change the saddle height when we changed the crank length? So the answer is no, we did not do this because two main reasons. The first one is when you lower in the saddle, you increase the minimal angle of the knee to try to maintain the maximal angle of extension on the knee on the down part of the Perylene. And when you opening the saddle, you maintain the minimum knee angle and you increasing the maximal angle. So it's impossible really to try to adjust the saddle to a new crank distance or a new crank length, because at the end of the day, somebody is going to get more fitted and the other one is going to get more closed or extended. There's no way of avoiding this kind of matter. And the second reason was that when we did and take the decision of not changing the height of the saddle, when we changed the length of the cranks, that you got here on these tables, the foot range of motion and the leg range of motion. On the right column, you go the medium values, that there were altered values, but not dramatically altered. I mean, those references are good references for extension of the leg, or sorry, for extension of the ankle in this case, and for extension of the leg, they are normal. So when you are getting a new cranks that they are longer than the previous ones that we did, we started with the 65, we changed to the 70 and then to the 75. What we show, it's one logical thing, that the people moves more the foot and moves more the leg. So they mirror a more complete exercise and more extended exercise, but without having maximum values that were somehow strange or out of the range of normality that we recommend from the point of view of the pedaling. This is quite logic, and this is the second reason that we said, okay, we think that it's not necessary to try to change the saddle height when we change the crank. This is not a conclusion of the studio, it's just our decision and the reason that we take the decision. Okay, I put three samples that also are related with the previous question. One rider on the first one with 75, 70, 75. Those are you can see that the DSS are quite good parameters. It's increasing during when you increase the length of the crank, it's increasing slightly, very slightly here, and more noticeable here on the first one. On this case, it's increasing, but it's starting from a very, very bad data from the point of view of the pedaling way. So this is a quite bad parameter that is getting worse when we increase the length. And the third one, it's a little bit, it's not very common, but happens often, that you can find the DSS on the upper part and the down part of the Perylene. On this case, for example, we can discuss if change here the distance of the Perylene and trying to put it in lowering the saddle could be better, or could at least try to amend the increasing of the dead spot score when we increase the length of the crank on this part, just because we are lowering the saddle. And for example, this could work to try to be as bad as the end, as bad as in the start. Okay, I can admit that. But what I can do when I can find something as this, because if I lower it, probably I will make worse on this part. And if we go upper, what I will find is the other part. So this is maybe the third reason. The way of pedaling is very, very particular and very different. And we try to take the decision of not changing nothing to try to see which was the evolution, the real evolution, just changing one parameter, on this case, the crank length. Okay, let's go to the results. So this is what we found on the medium values, 175, 2 of that spot score, DSS, increasing what 170 to 6.5 and 175 3.7 and 3. This is the median value of the results of the whole group of cyclists. Sorry. Then what we did is to classify the cyclists in the people that from the point of view of the weight were thin and not as thin, the height, tall and smaller people, body mass index more than 23.6 and less than 23.6, the annual kilometers of the riders, and the length. So we tried to see who was above the median value and who was below the median value. And the surprise was that was no relationship between the change on the crank because of the height of the rider. So the taller and the smaller was exactly the same, and the long-legged and the short-legged ones were exactly the same. So not affected factor because was not changing the DSS factor. The increase was absolutely normal. But when we analyzed the weight, the body mass index, and the annual kilometers, we saw very big difference between the thinners and the not as thin as riders, between the under 23 body mass index riders with Perylene to the not as good body mass index riders, 4.78, and from the riders that they were doing more than 7,000 kilometers per year, 135, and the riders that they will do less than 7,000 kilometers per year, 3.82. So it means that this spot score is not affected by crank length related with the length or the height. So the general recommendation that we can find everywhere about if you are a tall rider, you need to use very long cranks, and if you are a very short rider, you need to use them. That's probably is not absolute true. There is some factors related with probably these three ones that they could be explained as a physical condition that explain much more better how should be done the crank recommendation. Outside this studio, we found also a very interesting thing. The riders that they were riding 7,000 kilometers per year or more, they use it in a bigger range, the ankle, compared with the riders that they were doing less kilometers per year, that they were more stiff. This could take us to a misunderstanding of the recommendation that it's better to move more this than to move this, or it's better, it's contrary, maybe we could think that it's contradictory to see that it's better to move more the ankle if you are trying to do a lot of kilometers. This is not exactly true. What means is that the people that trains more, they are more able to adaptate to the change of crank length, and they can get more advantages for the change. The people that they are not able for doing this 7,000 kilometers per year, and probably they got less adaptation from the point of view of the range of motion of the ankle to trying to avoid the DSS that we can find in the previous results. So as a take-home recommendation of this second studio, you can see that the crank length must be selected by physical condition more than body measuring criteria, as has been done in the last 20 or maybe even 40 years. And a second one, recommend a shortened crank will be a very good advice for continuous pedaling efforts when physical capacities are weak, and no effect if capacities are good. This recommendation is just made for continuous cycling or the specialties of continuous cycling, maybe the competitive cycling, because his behavior and the internal logic of those cycling, or maybe even the mountain bike cycling, maybe cannot be related with this conclusion. We did this studio to give recommendation to the most common amount of customers that we work with in our business, that they are cyclotourists or people that they are enthusiastic of the bicycle, that they trying hard, but obviously they are not competitive cyclists from the point of view of racing cycling as much they do Gran Fondo or those kinds of endurance trials of cycling. So I think that this conclusion could be useful for those kind of clients. Maybe are not as much as useful for another kind of riders with another kind of cyclists. For the end, I want just to give thanks to my colleagues. This job probably would not be possible without them. Thanks to Iñaki, thanks to Danny, and thanks also to Mikel, because they work very hard to try to get this kind of data. And I'm very grateful today because, as I said, this job has been probably impossible to do without their collaboration. So thanks to all of them.